Right. And you can't, unless you look at the primary source documents, you can't see a lot of the sneakiness that's really going on in there. And so I like to show it on the screen. And kind of as you said, when I explain it to people, they're like, what do you do? I'm like, I read court documents on YouTube. They're like, what? I'm like, you do that? I'm like, yeah, it's a ton of fun. They're like, are you crazy? What are you talking about? I'm like, just come join us, man. It's fun because there's, serious issues in there. And what we are looking at, like one example from a show that we recently did, we're talking about birthright citizenship, right? And the subject to the jurisdiction thereof under the 14th Amendment. And we were reading an opinion where the judge was quoting the law, quoting the Constitution, but they just left out those little commas there in the subject to the jurisdiction thereof, right? So it's just one big fat run-on sentence as though it's not a separate, phrase that has any meaning. And then once they did that, they just delete the comments and then they just go through their analysis on the back of this fraudulent interpretation of the Constitution. And, unless you can see that, unless you can see the commas and point that out and show people what's going on, it's hard to explain that a judge is perverting the Constitution. A judge is not accurately recreating it or interpreting it right.
Hey, culminators. Today is a law day. It's been a real law day for me, but what day really isn't? And there's no day that isn't for Robert Gouveia. He is the guy, in my opinion, who has perfected and mastered the art of making a living off other lawyers' work.
That's true.
It's funny. I say the reason I say that is because my former partner, Harmeet Dillon, really hates law too because she considers it to be, and I don't get that. I don't get that at all. I mean,
That's
it's like,
interesting. I didn't know that about her.
yeah, she hates the idea that she's doing the work and other people are making a living off it. That's like saying, I think the problems with that are obvious. Robert has folks 530,000 subscribers on YouTube, and yet he really wants us to go to Rumble, which makes sense because he wants to get up to 500,000 on Rumble, where he's only at 70,000. But all right, so what Robert does, he goes through the stuff the lawyers write, and the lawyers write to each other, and the judges write, and he really turns it into English. And I give him over 95%. Over 95%. I'm not even saying it's not 100%. It's just the over is so great. I don't know if I can, but I watch when I want to find out what's going on. I don't read cases anymore. I read cases from my own work. Obviously, I'm responsible to do that. But when something comes down, I just have Robert, maybe sometimes Andrew Branca, now that he has branched out into this. They read the case to me. Because yes, I'm America's lawyer. I get that. But now, Robert, let's talk about you. You actually are a real lawyer, and you gave that up for showbiz. What's the story?
Yeah, and thank you, Ron. First of all, that was very nice of you to say that, and I really appreciate that coming from you because we followed your work, and I know you're at the forefront of these things. So it's a real nice compliment. So thank you for saying that. I think that this kind of, the start to this question ties into Harmeet's response on this and how her opinion on LawTube is, off maybe from my perspective on it. But what was happening ultimately, so I'm a criminal defense lawyer, so I was representing people every day charged with crimes in the state of Arizona. And we built a law firm and had, a whole team of people, lawyers, big group of, staff and all the things. And I was originally making videos just to help good people charged with crimes. That was it. So I was Arizona specific law stuff that.
Give me a year. When did you start making videos?
So that would probably be, I think my first video was probably 2015. And then
Okay. 10 years ago.
Yeah, I had like a little bit of a wave there and then I stopped. And then I think I went to, some marketing conference and somebody said, you got to start really doing it. And I started just creating a lot of videos. So I went through like this 2-year phase where I did about 450 to 500 videos, give or take, on Arizona law, just strict Arizona law. Arizona DUI, second offense in the city of Phoenix Municipal Court. How does it work, right? And so it was very targeted just to help people and get clients. And our firm grew and we were successful, and it was a very good marketing strategy. And I think very useful because it was actually helping people. It's not, and these weren't like 2 minute videos of just like, hey, I'm a great lawyer, call our office and we'll care for you better than anyone else, right? It was like 20
No, no,
minutes,
no.
like
We'll fight for you. We'll
they'll
fight for
fight
you.
for you. Yeah. Right. So one of our most popular videos was like a 30-minute detail on photo radar, for example. So like how to fight those and the whole thing. And we did everything from, simple traffic stuff all the way up to major felonies. And that's how I got started on YouTube. But then the kind of transition happened back in March 2020, right when we got the national lockdown. So COVID hit, and I saw this reaction out there from many people on the defense side, defense lawyers, like my colleagues out there. Everybody hit the panic button, man, and everybody was freaking out, saying we got to lock the courts down, we got to shut the jails down, all the processes come to a complete halt. And I was pretty outraged about that because I feel, we've got an obligation to our clients. We've got guys sitting in custody. We can't just have like everything stop because some other defense lawyers are scared about it. And so I started just pulling up the lockdown orders and the governor's orders, right, that they would release every 2 weeks, kind of extending the lockdown, extend the lockdown. And I would just put those on the screen, go through them, explain why I thought that they were illegitimate, essentially. And I was almost out of frustration and out of panic, and I really didn't know what to do. It's like our law firm, we had built this whole law firm up, and everything was closing. All the bars, all the stuff that fuels your criminal defense firm, which are
Bars fuel for criminal defense practice. I never even thought about that. I'm so naive.
well, it's the whole, yeah, I mean, society comes to a stop, right? So you're not out there doing things. People aren't getting in trouble. The cops aren't arresting people. But what we actually saw, I mean, as a little tangent on that, was we saw the crimes change a bit. We saw like domestic violence go up, but DUIs go down, right? So there were some permutations in that, and the market shifted a bit. But the the point of me starting watching the Watchers was mostly born out of panic, frustration, concern. I didn't know what else to do. I was trying to have these arguments with, other colleagues, and I just decided to speak about it. And so we made some videos. People hopped online, they watched it, and they appreciated, I think, what we were saying. And so it slowly started to progress from there. And we started covering other cases that people were interested in. And cases like Kyle Rittenhouse, I think, was one of the first big ones that we did. 2020 was wild, right? Because we had George Floyd, we had Rittenhouse, we had a bunch of stuff. We had the election.
That's
I mean,
really when I kind of discovered YouTube, thanks to to Joe Neerman. I
good
was, I
logic.
mean,
Yeah.
obviously, I always knew there was YouTube, but I didn't know what lawyers were doing on YouTube, and I got involved, with Rick on the Rittenhouse case, and it was yeah, but that was a big breakout year for LawTube,
Big time. Yeah.
if
And
I
I
may
think,
use the expression. I know that some of us don't like that term, but most of us are pretty comfortable with it.
yeah, no, I'm fine with that. I mean, I've been called a part of a lot worse things. So, that's fine. And I think that was part of a trend that was happening in 2020. Like a lot of people were looking for alternative answers. They were looking for explanations. I think many of us could kind of sense that there wasn't truth in the air. And so people were going online. Many of us were locked down, so you had to go online. So you had to kind of go find a place where you could meet other people who thought like you. And
Of course, as
what
a
I,
criminal defense lawyer, you already had a an orientation to think about the state in a certain way that even commercial litigators such as myself did not.
yeah, I think that's right. I don't know if it's in my DNA or what, but just a natural skepticism and a kind of an aversion to authority. And when people tell me that it has to be a certain way, right? I like to question that and ask why and what's their background, what's the thesis for this, and challenge it because one of my operating principles, and I think many people's, is freedom, and we really want to adhere to that. And so when somebody's coming to try to take that away from you, you react. And I actually wanted to be a prosecutor, which was kind of funny. When I was in law school, my first year, I wanted to go put the bad guys away. I was like, man, we're going to clean up these streets and we're going to, put the criminals behind bars and all that stuff. And I was like gung ho my first semester. And I remember arguing with a bunch of other law students who were generally on the other side of like, hardline prosecution. And back when I was coming up, still very liberal. I'm sure it still is. But I would get into these fights with these other students who would say, you can't just be so aggressive and you can't bend the rules on these constitutional provisions and defend Miranda and all these. And I was like opposite. Then I went to work for a criminal defense law firm as an intern for about 2 years, and I had to interface with people, clients, right, who'd come in, people charged with crimes, and I started to empathize and realize that 90%, 99% of them are good people. They had a bad night, they had a bad argument, they had a bad drive, something went wrong, but they're good people. And so I was trying to negotiate with the government to get good deals. And I ran into just bureaucracy, man, like not even humanity, not even people would read or look at my documents. They would just come, look at a chart. Your client's got this crime, he's got this category level offense, and this is the penalty kind of a
But you're
situation.
obviously what you're describing is a you're in describing yourself and your experiences, you're already getting across an idealism. You were in law school. You wanted to fix things. You wanted to become a prosecutor. You wanted to do good in the world. So that already puts you, talk about 99%, that puts you in a very teeny tiny percentage of people. Let's just say that even if a quarter or a third of people who go into law school are like that, very few leave law school that idealistic. Maybe so that probably is a theme that follows you because you're going to have to find alternative ways of making a living if you're an idealist or of doing things at least because those patterns and that not being listened to and all that frustration is again the courts are not we call it the justice system, but that's just what we call it.
Exact right. And I think a lot of people, myself included, are, brought up to the courts are impartial, unbiased, nonpartisan. They're looking at the interests and asking whether stuff is in alignment with the Constitution and all these things. And then you get into it and you realize that a lot of it's just a giant sausage factory and it is pretty disgusting in there. And you want to be able to deliver for a person who's a good person who's going to lose, maybe their job or something like that from one mistake. And it can really kind of spiral out of control. And I can easily see how people get jaded in the process because you want to go in and you want to make changes, and then you realize you're kind of up against spreadsheets and bureaucracy, and it's very
And that's
difficult.
on both sides. On the criminal side. Of course, 2020 was a bumper year also for abuse of government authority, or really 2021, right? As we bleed into 2021 and I don't know how political you were getting in 2020, but once you have the January 6th events and the mass prosecutions and the dragnet and the abuse of government authority, you know, what astonished me during that period, and this is still true, is how quiescent, how absolutely passive the criminal defense bar as a whole
Yep.
was about the wholesale abuse of civil rights. In addition to all this stuff, forget about the Trump prosecutions and the absolute, you know, destruction of attorney-client privilege in multiple instances. It just turns out everyone is really incredibly political, and there are very few people who will speak out. And if you did speak out, you actually risk, and we're still seeing this today, disciplinary proceedings by a bar ethics authorities. Mind-boggling.
Right. And it's worse than I think many people even realize because there were other organizations like the 65 Project that were trying to go take lawyers' licenses away. So
Yeah.
even if you just represented Trump, like even if you just represented him, just did your job as a lawyer, just to go advocate for
Look what they
somebody, right?
did to Rudy Giuliani. I don't care. I mean, you think his stuff was so out there compared to the crap, the lawfare that the left has been engaged in for decades? When do you think you became more, I mean, what was 2020, 2021 when you really started becoming more political?
Yeah, definitely. 2020 was something that shook me out of my, I think, default general trust of maybe the federal government. I kind of thought I've been brought up thinking like the CDC is going to take care of us and that once, a pandemic hit, they would be technologically advanced and save America and all the things. And they total failure. And then we got to see it's like you can't unsee it once it happens. They tell you put the mask on, take the mask off, do this, do that, and all these things. And then the governors are making their arguments and then they extend it. Only going to be 14 days. We swear. That's it. Then it turns into like years of this stuff. And you go, all right. So it it activated me without a question throughout 2020, and I kind of got to a breaking point right around the time that the national emergency hit. And so I think our first show was on a Watching the Watchers Wednesday, sometime right around that national emergency time. And from there, we kept going, but I started to, I think, realize that the lawyers, the criminal defense lawyers, and I think people who love, the Constitution, people who are practicing, right, guys like you and others who are filing these lawsuits all the time, often don't have the time or the resources to go do their own PR, essentially. Go sell the stuff, right? Go to the public and explain what's happening to, on front stage. Like there's a lot of backstage stuff going on, but the public needs to know, man. Like there's brilliant philosophical, deep fights that are happening about our society, our justice system every day. And the lawyers are, typing away. So what I started to think was, I could add value to the conversation. Like I could add, help to our team and be a player who can do things that the other guys can't do. Right. So the smart lawyers are writing all of the briefs and everything. And then your humble document reader just goes through them and shares them. And I think we can kind of tag team these issues because we've got, the Democrats, they've got a whole legal infrastructure, that whole side of the aisle. I mean, it's deep, 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 deep. And until very recently, they had the media too. So we needed to start building infrastructure in both of those arenas. And once, once I kind of cracked the shell a little bit and I started to say, okay, I can speak. And I got a lot of pushback, as you mentioned earlier. I didn't get any problems with the state bar or anything like that, but I had other lawyers, other colleagues in Arizona that I looked up to, like that I went to their CLEs, that I like learned from them. How do I do a trial? All this stuff. When I started my show, sending me messages, sending me texts saying, dude, what are you doing? Like you're ruining your career. You sound like a fool. You have no idea what you're talking about. And so we just kept going. And I just said, they're wrong. I think we're right. And we went through a lot. After January 6th, we got suspended on YouTube. They, hit our channel for, I think, a week because we were harmful and dangerous. They made us delete a bunch of COVID videos and those things. And then they actually demonetized our whole channel for 9 months, right? And it was
Now, where were
something.
you were still practicing law?
Still practicing law. And so I was doing the live stream at the end of my workday, essentially. So I'd get up, do all my law firm stuff, and then do the live stream at the end of the day. And so I had income still, right? I had another business. And so I didn't necessarily need the YouTube money or anything. But if I had, it probably would have taken me out, right? Like I would have had to stop doing the show and go and earn income somewhere else. And so I felt like it was an attack on us to try to silence us. And that it hardened my resolve. I just said, oh, okay, fine. You want to try to censor it. I'm going to keep doing the show anyways. And we just kept the show going. And I think people appreciated it. And we were calling out all of the same stuff, all of the January 6th stuff, all
How
of
did
the
you get past the demonetization? I assume you got past demonetization. You're doing this for a living now, right?
we we did. Yeah, they reinstated us after 9 months. So they
Was it a
reviewed
9 month suspension, or was that was with the terms, or just after 9 months they started cleaning house and they started?
something changed and I think there's probably a financial incentive too. Like they know this, like the channel's getting a lot of views and they can make, YouTube makes good money off of their creators. It's a huge company. So I don't know if they just made like a after January 6th, a political decision. And then once the heat kind of died down 9 months later, they reactivated us, but they didn't give us any notice or anything like that. Like right now, I think that they've revised their policy so that if you do get demonetized, you can go and confirm that you can reapply in 30 days or whatever. But that wasn't the case back then. So we just kind of sat around and did the show, and then monetization came back. We kept growing our audience, just kept speaking the truth, and we're still here, so it's good news.
And when I mean, I assume that you're not going to court anymore. That you,
No, this is the full-time gig now. Yeah, so say we practice in the court of public opinion now, and we read what the smart lawyers write and try to explain it and, make sense of what's going on out there with these judges and all the court proceedings.
It is interesting to me that reading documents is such it's fun. I'm always explaining to people that depositions are you're mostly, especially, not I don't do personal injury work. Commercial litigation, you're going to get a bunch of after some getting to know you kind of questions. You're going to be asked about documents for hours and hours and hours. Documents are the thing. And yet, criminal defense lawyers are not known for their mastery of the documents.
Right.
So
Right.
you had to really learn, and I mean, and all the civil, the civil litigation stuff, you had to get yourself up to speed, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my background is as a criminal defense lawyer, and a lot of that is where we started. Talking Kyle Rittenhouse, talking George Floyd, Derek Chauvin, a lot of that stuff, and then the election hit, and then we started looking at all of these other election lawsuits. And I, truthfully, I've got no background in election law. I've never filed an election lawsuit or anything like that, but I can speak the language enough that I can translate it and kind of interpret it on the fly, and we can parse through the documents. And a lot of them are pretty relatively straightforward. Like once you get through the facade of all like the legal complexities, you can boil it down to a couple basic principles, and I think have real debates and conversations about those, and then take it from there.
No,
But
I do think you do it very well. And I mean, the feedback that I get, I just don't, when I do that, so I hardly ever do what you do. Sometimes I'm just captured and I just have to walk through a document. But people really, really appreciate it because you kind of forget how inscrutable so much of the language that we use and the concepts that we deal in are to normal people.
right, and you can't, unless you look at the primary source documents, you can't see a lot of the sneakiness that's really going on in there. And so I like to show it on the screen. And kind of as you said, when I explain it to people, they're like, "What do you do?" I'm like, "I read court documents on YouTube." They're like, "What? Like, you do that?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's a ton of fun." They're like, "Are you crazy? What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Just come join us, man. It's fun because there's, serious issues in there." And what we are looking at, like one example from a show that we recently did, we're talking about birthright citizenship, right? And the subject to the jurisdiction thereof under the 14th Amendment. And we were reading an opinion where the judge was quoting the law, quoting the Constitution, but they just left out those little commas there in the subject to the jurisdiction thereof, right? So it's just one big fat run-on sentence as though it's not a separate, phrase that has any meaning. And then once they did that, they just delete the comments and then they just go through their analysis on the back of this fraudulent interpretation of the Constitution. And unless you can see that, unless you can see the commas and point that out and show people what's going on, it's hard to explain that a judge is perverting the Constitution. A judge is not accurately recreating it or interpreting it right. And uh, honestly, it's very helpful for me. I learn a lot going through these documents, and a lot of the times we're kind of going through them in real time together. It's on the fly, and so we have the same reaction. I'm like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that's even in here," And so I think uh, it's instructive in that you can really see it from the primary source what is happening, and there's value in there that you don't get from the 2-minute sound bites about some judge issued a ruling somewhere.
Well, the vast majority of people who are described as reporters have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to legal process. Nothing. Even some who are legal correspondents.
Yep.
And then there are the frauds like Glenn, what's his name?
Kirshner.
Yeah. A former U.S. assistant U.S. attorney. Imagine being that fraudulent and having had the power to put people away, to deprive people of their liberties. Did he practice law the way he, the way he reports on it? My God, what a chilling. I mean, one thing, I'm always asking this of prosecutors, how, like, I never wanted the responsibility. Like obviously we need people to be, recently I've been watching a lot of courtroom, these terrible white trash people and minority people showing up in front of judges. And of course, the sovereign citizen stuff doesn't make their lives any better, but also people who commit terrible crimes. Early in my career, I was waiting for a status conference or a motion in federal court in New Jersey, and we had to wait for an arraignment. It was in front of a magistrate, and I'd never seen that before. A panel slides out of a door that I didn't know existed. Out walk two federal marshals with a guy in an orange suit, handcuffed and shackled.
Mhm.
This guy was a dangerous person, but even talking about it now, I get very emotional to see a human being so degraded. And I'm just way too sensitive for this world. All right. It's guy, obviously, I want that guy in shackles. I absolutely want that guy in shackles. But it's amazing to me that you have all these prosecutors who look at getting convictions as a career,
Yep.
like something they have to achieve for their career. And they just, how do you turn off the humanity part when you know your case isn't good? And what happened on January 6th? Where did the consciousness of these people go?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one I've been asking myself for a long time. I don't know how you swear an oath, you go to law school, you want, you know, I have a sense that I want to protect the integrity of our profession. I want, lawyers to do what they say they're going to do. When a criminal defense lawyer or any lawyer steals money from somebody or, doesn't do their job, that's infuriating to me because we're trying to build a justice system that improves the lives of all of our, societal members. And when prosecutors, I've had a lot of experience with prosecutors, and I rip on them on the show regularly because of that culture. And there are good prosecutors out there who I've had good interactions with, but by and large, and it depends on the cities. Like a lot of it is context dependent. So if you're in a small town, you have maybe a little bit more reasonable prosecutor who has more power. But if you go to a big city like a Maricopa County or something, it's just systematized. And it's almost like that humanity is just stripped out of them. And I've had conversations like face to face where I'm just asking, like, I've shown them videos, I've shown them pictures right to their faces and showing my guy's innocent. This other guy swung first or whatever. And they just look at you kind of dead eyes, soulless stares, like you're just another defense attorney, your client's just another piece of meat. And what's kind of sick about it too is that the judges will validate that. Like the judges will just kind of continue that process because it's just a churn and burn. And I agree with you. I have a lot of empathy for people who are in those positions. And I ask myself what happened to them, right? The people who are abusing the kids, are they mentally unwell? Do they have a tumor in their brain? Were they abused as kids? Okay, what is the cause of this failing that we can, work towards remedying? But there's not much of that is in the system. It's just, you come in, you get charged, you go to jail, everybody gets paid, moves on to the next case. And to me, that's just like a manufacturing system. It's not actually a justice system. We don't really want that in our society.
Let's move away from criminal. It's depressing.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all become constitutional lawyers, and we've seen what's going on in the federal judiciary.
Yep.
I mean, there's another kind of lack of conscience. Forget about the J6 stuff, because that's just another prosecutor story. This idea that judges are going to decide cases that they don't have jurisdiction over. Plainly, statutorily, they do not have jurisdiction. They rule on them anyway. Supreme Court reverses them. And imagine being reversed by the Supreme Court when you're a district judge,
I know.
and then they do it again.
Yeah.
What kind of madness is this?
I I think they are just political operators. I mean, I really have a hard time explaining it any other way because we just saw, and I'm sure you saw it, Gorsuch, right, came down with his decision in a concurring opinion where he kind of
Yes.
shredded them. He's like, There are three, like this has happened three times. We've spoken to you guys. You have to follow the order even if you don't like it, and they're still doing
But
it.
think about this. Gorsuch had to put that into a concurrence.
Yeah,
Roberts wouldn't let him put it in the majority opinion.
yeah,
That's what a pussy he is.
yeah. And Roberts, was he in the dissent on that one, or was
He
that the
might that
majority?
might I don't remember
I
if
don't
it was
remember.
that one, but he was recently on the wrong side of one of these.
He was on the wrong side, yeah. And that Gorsuch statement I thought was very necessary, but I don't know that it's going to cause anything because, like you said, it's just kind of a throwaway line from him. And until there's real repercussions for the judges, like Judge Boasberg, he had his entire injunction, he's at a DC, entire injunction basically reversed, and it still, held Trump in contempt until the Supreme Court came back down. So if you get a direct order and you try to, snake your way into some other legal provision that still gives you power, that to me feels like malfeasance or like malpractice,
And
like it's
and
under
and you
the
know what's
bar.
crazy? I tried a case in front of Boasberg earlier this year. It went well, and I thought he did a good job of judging.
Interesting.
Okay, I give him a solid grade. I don't want to get more specific than that. There were
Sure.
still post-trial motions pending in front of him. He would, and I also, interestingly, 'cause it was a completely non-political case. Jury was great. We got to speak to the jury afterwards, and what a pleasure it was to hear how they had not been fooled and how they knew what the real issue was. And for a little while, you feel like, wow, this really could work.
Right.
And it was a DC jury, and it was racially mixed jury.
Interesting.
And do I know what parties they were members of? I don't know, but they were great. There's something about these political cases, however, that has made these judges, but especially in the DC courts, it flips some kind of switch for them. They obviously suffered a sort of trauma, a social psychological trauma
Yep.
in connection with January 6th, and the official moral view of everyone in the DC, certainly federal bench, became we will we will make these political, these are going to be political prosecutions, and we're fine with that.
Yeah, we saw that across the board. I mean, we saw what they did to the J6ers repeatedly. And they're, I think it's just a trend that we're seeing where if the Democratic Party or the judges are losing, right, at the ballot box, right, from zooming out on the big picture, right, they tried to, this is not like a new thing after Trump won. They indicted him. They charged him four times. They tried to bankrupt him. They tried to throw him off the ballot. And the Supreme Court had to step in and solve that. So it's been, I think, just a pattern of a political party that can't win in the arena of ideas, is losing the votes, is realizing that a lot of their policies are not popular. They just go and try to capture the judiciary, and then the judges will be the activists inside the judiciary that will give them some cover in other areas. Like we're seeing in Utah right now, the judge in Utah just said the legislature has to redraw the maps. And the idea is that if the legislature redraws the maps, the Democrats are going to pick up a seat. So you've got one judge who's kind of, creating this crack in the power structure so that they can gain a foothold. And it's not an appropriate role for the courts, which is the main problem here. And so the next question is, what do we do about it? And what is Congress going to do about it, if anything? So far, it's been pretty quiet out of there. And these judges, the Supreme Court's not correcting them, and they just
And
kind of
that's a
sit.
point, you just use the term step in, Supreme Court step in. One of the most important things guys like you do is explain to people. I see on social, I spend more time on X than you do.
Yeah,
And one of the things people are always asking me is, when's the Supreme Court going to step in? And we have
right,
to explain, that's not, they don't step in.
right,
They don't step in. They're not the court of step in. They are a court. There are certain appeals of right, but hardly any of the ones that you want.
right.
They have to decide that they even care about a case. And and there's something we have, and civilians have to remember that's a good thing. That because that's actually the model that we want for the judiciary, which is doing too much stepping in, precisely because of what you said, that the other political ways of getting their policies or their power uh, preserved is not, again, it's not at the ballot box, it's through the judiciary.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction because that is a part of the process, right? And when I was saying step in, I kind of was meaning like Gorsuch and the majority, once they got the case, they could,
Oh no, I wasn't correcting you. I understand what you were saying. I'm saying, but you by the kind of education you're providing is people are so frustrated and they need to understand, yeah, Roberts may be a pussy, but this isn't part of him being a pussy.
right.
There, and look, let's face it, sometimes he comes through. Sometimes he comes through, and he might very well be listening to us and saying, listen, I'll take your slings and barbs. This is what I think I have to do to preserve something, whatever it is he's trying to preserve. You know, Supreme Court experts have weighed in on that.
Oh, well, I think I was going to say that the stepping in thing, I think is an important nuance because the procedure is very important, almost oftentimes more important than the substance, and it's a lot less sexy, right? So you don't like to talk about jurisdiction and leapfrogging appeals and all of that procedure. In fact, in a lot of the documents, we kind of just fast forward through all of the procedural history just to get to the good stuff. But it is important because if you're asking the Supreme Court to do something that it can't do, then I think that's just going to result in frustration. And so a lot of what we have talked about is just, there's a timeline to these things. And this is a common frustration in any area of legal law. It's just, why is it taking so long? It takes forever to do all like everything basically. And so, right now we're in the middle, I think, of an exposition. And what Trump is doing and this new administration is doing is drawing out a lot of these objectors. And so I still think we're still pretty early in the game. I do hope that, I would like to see Congress at least maybe talk about it, just float it, just say, hey, we're keeping an eye on you judges, and we have a constitutional power and a duty to make sure you're reined in, and just put a little pressure on them, right, to see if they will fall back into ethical bounds and actually do their jobs.
Another thing that I think people need to understand is that I'm not endorsing being a goody two shoes or being ineffectual because of your high mindedness, but becoming what you hate is not a winning strategy. Where the arrest? Where the arrest? Response from Ron Coleman. Well, criminal investigations take time. You really need to put together. It has to go through, and you've got a hostile judicial. They didn't waste any time. Yeah, but right, but they're the bad guys.
Right.
If you want us to also be the bad guys, then all you're fighting over is the spoils. All you're fighting over is the carcass.
Right.
It matters. Things that matter. Again, you're an idealist, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't want to settle for some sort of, two-party system where they're both corrupt. I want a strong America with parties that have our interest in mind. And there's there's a battle happening right now in the courts, in the filings, and we're seeing, I think it's going to just continue to escalate. Like, I don't think it's going the other direction. I think that the Republican Party's arming up. We see all these redistricting battles coming up. Like, in other words, the courts and the law is really becoming the primary battleground in this. It's not, media and getting out the vote. It's about perverting the rules. And we saw a lot of this in 2020, and we covered a lot of that back when all of the uh, you know, basically Democrat lawyers, guys like Mark Elias at Democracy Docket, they were filing lawsuits and suing the secretaries of states in all the swing states. And then what would happen? So you have a liberal group suing a liberal secretary of state, and they would say, we have an emergency. COVID's going to kill everybody. So we have to waive signature requirements in Wisconsin or postpone the ballot collection dates in Pennsylvania or whatever. And then the secretaries would come in and say, sure, yeah, have a settlement agreement because they want to end the lawsuit. the courts would approve it, and they'd put that into operation. And the legislature that governs the elections had nothing to do with it. And it was happening all over the country, and it
I mean,
perverted.
there were legislatures that did have what to do with it,
Definitely.
but again, you have Republicans clueless, really, idealistic to some extent. I mean, look, they're all politicians. I'm not starry-eyed about that. But
Right.
well, yeah, okay, that sounds like a fair thing. Well, we want to keep people safe, we want to keep people healthy. And where the Democrats, they had planned this mail-in ballot scam already years in advance.
Yep.
Or let me take a step back. I'm always trying to explain to people that when you, and one thing I don't see you do a lot is, all right, you'll make fun of clowns like the woman in Georgia,
Fanny, big
Fanny,
Fanny. Yeah.
right? I mean, those people are just objects of ridicule, and rightfully so. But
Right.
in terms of working real lawyers, I don't see you the way some people do, jumping on people's asses and second guessing them. Because you understand, the phrase I used to use, it's become kind of obsolete in the 21st century. If you don't have the red welt, if you don't have the file yourself, you don't know what considerations a lawyer has in front of him in making judgment calls, and either whether it's make how you plead a case, what evidence you have, what witnesses are available, what witnesses are a terrible idea to deal with, whether someone's sick in your client's family and they simply have to fold because their lives are falling up. The way people jumped on Jenna Ellis.
Yep. Which I did. Yeah.
But you don't know. You just don't know what's going on in her
You
life.
don't. You don't.
And and my having okay, that was my framing. Nonetheless, we do make these, we do evaluate the strength of cases and the strength of defenses, and more the strength of judicial decisions that we know are going to be overturned. Um, do you think people are coming away among your audience with more confidence in the system or less because you're exposing what might be in that red well? But you're telling them, more of the sausage making. Is that better or worse?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really interesting and deep question. And if it's about confidence, I think it's probably an ebb and flow, and I think people don't have a lot of confidence in the current system. And so the kind of dismantling of a lot of the old bad institutions like a corrupt DOJ, a corrupt FBI, a corrupt CDC, you know, traditionally, like these institutions provided people confidence. They thought that these things were legitimate, like the Justice Department did justice and the CDC could prevent disease and all these things. And then a lot of that confidence, I think, started to crumble and to fall. And I know it got shattered out of my existence. I have a lot more disdain for those agencies now than I did before, pre-COVID.
Sure.
So my confidence has gone down in those institutions and those entities, but I think that there's a reaction to that as well. And in terms of, confidence in, I think the growth of a liberty movement, of a reawakening of people who care about free speech and who care about, our American Constitution and the process of how our government works, and they don't want corrupt FBI, corrupt DOJ. We're going through the process where we are in many ways, criticizing and condemning these agencies and holding them accountable for what we believe are their injustices. And so I think I personally have confidence in that kind of ascendancy of this new wave of people who are interested in getting engaged civically with these issues that a lot of people just, we're consuming regurgitated news and material. And I understand, criticisms against me for commenting maybe out of turn. A lot of armchair quarterbacking going on, backseat driving going on. I'm not the attorney in the case, and I definitely don't know everything that's going on. I try not to claim that I do. I mean, we have fun and we dunk on people, but I try not to be like the authority of truth, like this is the right way. And part of what we do is put the documents on the screen so that people can read them and go through them with us, right? And if I don't read the full thing, they can go look them up and read them themselves. But I will read it, I will share my take on it. Of course, you can read the same document, you might have a different take on it, and then we can have a conversation. But My goal, my hope is I don't want to be somebody who is creating more negativity and more, red meat slop that is just kind of angering people and just spinning people up into a fury and a tizzy, right? Which I think there's a lot of that out there. A lot of people just you come in, you get your rage pellet, just show
Right.
up, take it.
Right.
And we don't want to do that. We do get enraged, we do get angry, we do have a lot of provocative opinions, but we're hopeful that it's in the service of really our channel values, which are accountability, transparency, and justice. And we say that at the end of every show, and that's what our mission is.
I think you achieve that mission, and I think that I really do think that by explaining what's going on and helping people to again establish a framework for understanding what's going on, ultimately you're explaining to them why it's worth to continue fighting,
Right.
because it's the temptation towards abandoning the whole enterprise and just being super cynical. Nothing's going to happen to him. They're going
So,
to, it's never, every day I wake up and do something that is not necessarily going to succeed professionally, but that I need to do because it's the right thing to do. And maybe eventually, I mean, that's how I got to the Supreme Court. I challenged a law that others had challenged and lost many, many times. I was the guy who was in the right place at the right time and got it overturned.
yeah.
For all the criticism of the, of the Department of Justice, their record in the Supreme Court is pretty impressive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Baby
No,
steps. And the slowness. Also, I mean, it is hard for people to understand why things are so slow, and you can't, you until you've watched the work process of legal papers being drafted and the decisions that have to be made, it's kind of hard to get across. But I think you do a very good job of it. I enjoy your program. It's very frequently on, and as I said, easier than reading, easier than reading those cases. And plus you understand some stuff. Thank
I,
you.
I appreciate it. And I just wanted to comment on your apathy, kind of your complacency comment. And
Yeah,
I, I think it's very important, man. And I really appreciate the effort that you put in to spreading your message. I follow you on X. You're posting a bunch, you're having great conversations with people.
thank
And
you.
I think it is important for our side to keep that energy level up because if we allow people to get complacent and apathetic and just disconnect with the civic process,
Exactly. Yeah.
that's a problem for all of us. And so we try to have fun on our channel. We're not right all the time. And I think
There are people who are a lot wronger than you a lot more often, and you know
well,
exactly who I'm talking about.
yeah, I appreciate that, Ron. It's a really nice compliment coming from you. And thank you for having me on. I really appreciate chatting with you.
Thank you for culminating with me. Keep up the good work.